Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today, we're tackling a really insightful book, Irvin D. Yalom's The Gift of Therapy. It's a must-read, really. Whether you're a therapist yourself, in therapy, or just curious about how therapy actually works.
Okay, I'll bite. Have you ever wondered what really goes on in therapy? I mean, forget the stereotypes we see on TV. I'm talking about the real human connection that makes a difference. Yalom basically throws open the doors and invites us in. And let me tell you, it's not what you expect.
Exactly. The gift of therapy is special. It's part how-to manual, part thoughtful reflection. Yalom uses his decades of experience to show us that therapy is both an art and a collaboration. It's not about labeling or quick fixes, but about becoming, as Yalom puts it, a fellow traveler in the shared human experience.
Okay, that sounds a little touchy-feely. But seriously, he's not just being philosophical, right? I mean, Yalom actually gets into the nitty-gritty of therapy. Building trust, working through grief, and even facing those big, scary, existential questions that most of us avoid.
Absolutely. Today, we're going to explore 3 key things that make his approach so unique. First, we'll discuss the vital connection between therapist and patient, a relationship built on honesty and, frankly, a lot of courage from both sides. Second, we'll unpack some of Yalom's specific therapy tools, things like dream interpretation and how to deal with emotional obstacles. And finally, we're going to dive into those big existential themes that define his work: mortality, freedom, and the search for meaning in our lives.
So whether you are here to learn something meaningful, or just want to know why therapists casually talk about death all the time, buckle up. We are going deep into this one.
So, picking up where we left off, the therapist-patient relationship, that's really the heart of Yalom's philosophy. And what's so groundbreaking is this fellow traveler's idea. It completely changes the game. The therapist isn't this all-knowing guru, and the patient isn't just passively receiving wisdom. It's about journeying together, understanding that we're all wrestling with the same fundamental questions, right?
Exactly. Although I have to admit, when I first encountered fellow travelers, I was a bit skeptical. Sounded a little too kumbaya for me. But after diving into Yalom's work, seeing how he applied it, it really resonated. There's something incredibly genuine about a therapist acknowledging, hey, I'm human too.
It's so freeing, isn't it? Think about his reference to Hermann Hesse's story about Joseph and Dion, these 2 healers who realize they each need something from the other. That's such a powerful image of how no one is ever completely whole or broken. Therapy becomes this reciprocal process, not some top-down lecture, don't you think?
I agree. But playing devil's advocate here, doesn't this open the door for things to get a little complicated? Are there potential downsides? I mean, could you imagine pouring out your soul and then worrying if your patient is thinking, maybe I need a therapist who's not grappling with their own issues?
Sure, there's nuance there. It's not about hijacking the session for your own therapy. Yalom is really clear about appropriate self-disclosure. It needs to be a thoughtful vulnerability that actually benefits the patient. For instance, when he admits to uncertainties or mistakes, it's not for sympathy. It's to show honesty and that he is also human.
So, a delicate balance between being vulnerable and still being in control. Like that case with Jose, dealing with abandonment, and then the therapist shares this personal moment of loss. That connection built trust, helped Jose feel less alone. But where do we draw the line, right? How do you ensure your openness doesn't overshadow the patient?
The key is intention. Think of it like seasoning a dish. You want just enough to bring out the flavor, not overwhelm it. When Yalom talks about sharing struggles, it's always with the patient's well-being in mind. With Jose, that little story showed him his fear of abandonment was valid, which made it safer to explore those feelings.
Okay, that's a fair point. And there's a real humility in that too. Yalom admits that therapists as authority figures can be intimidating, which can shut people down. The fellow traveler's approach changes that power dynamic. I've even noticed patients relax when I admit, look, I don't have all the answers here.
That humility isn't just about sharing, it's about listening too. Because empathy, that's the heartbeat of Yalom's method. It goes beyond that superficial I feel your pain thing. It's about diving deeply into the patient's world, so you can reflect it back clearly. Yalom wrote about a patient recalling a poignant memory with their father. What seemed like every day unveiled unresolved pain about reconciliation and loss.
Right. Linking empathy and emotional landscapes. That's so crucial. It's not just about understanding the feelings, it's about using them as guideposts. When a therapist connects to those memories or metaphors, it's like saying, I truly see you. And that's when real progress starts.
It's a two-way street. Empathy deepens the patient's connection to themselves and sharpens the therapist's awareness of their own reactions. Yalom calls it the inner mirror. If a therapist is feeling frustrated, it could be reflecting unspoken frustrations in the patient. Identifying that gives both of them insight.
Oh, I'm familiar with that mirror. I remember once feeling incredibly annoyed with a patient who kept avoiding questions about their family. Then, weeks later, they revealed a history of being shut down whenever they brought up tough issues back home. My frustration. A total reflection of how they'd been treated their whole life.
Exactly. And Yalom would argue that those moments of discovery really strengthen the relationship. That's why transparency is so crucial. When therapists allow the relationship itself to be explored, asking, how are we doing in this session? It can reveal patterns that patients don't even realize extend beyond therapy.
Ugh, that awkward, how am I doing the current question. I've always struggled with that one. It feels like asking, did you enjoy the soup? But I see the bigger picture. Encouraging patients to express discomfort or give feedback allows them to see patterns in their other relationships. If they're being overly deferential to me, are they mirroring that behavior with other authority figures?
That vulnerability on both sides, that's what creates change. Yalom's case studies really highlight this. Remember the therapist who accidentally invalidated a patient by cutting them off mid-sentence? Confronting that mistake with compassion didn't just fix the trust. It taught the patient that relationships can survive mistakes when handled with care.
And that's something you're not going to find on a CBT worksheet. Therapy is sometimes chaotic because human relationships are chaotic. You can't avoid making mistakes, but you can own them. And that can be so healing for the patient.
And for therapists, too. Therapy isn't about being perfect. It's about growing together. From owning our mistakes to practicing radical empathy to sharing strategically, Yalom's approach challenges us to see this therapeutic relationship as a space where we can both be brave and transform. So, building on that relational foundation, the next really crucial thing is how we personalize the therapy. These are the specific techniques where that therapist-patient relationship really takes shape in a very individual way. It's not about one-size-fits-all tools, but about reflecting the patient's unique needs, their emotional world, you know? It's like the bridge from being that supportive fellow traveler to actually tailoring the therapy to the person in front of you.
Okay, so the flow is relationship first, then individualizing the techniques, right? And then you get to the existential core of things. Got it. So what comes first in that personalized approach?
Well, a cornerstone of Yalom's approach is the here and now method. And this isn't just about reflecting on the past or planning for the future. It's about using the therapy session itself as a real-time mirror for the patient's relationship patterns.
Right. The idea that the therapy session is the entire world in miniature, just shrunk down to fit 2 chairs. So whatever dramas, whatever defenses someone's playing out in their everyday life will eventually show up right there in the room. It's a bit like a stage play, really, except no costumes, no script, and hopefully, 0 applause.
Perfect metaphor. So Yalom gives this example of Ron, right? He's a clinical psychology student struggling with relationships. And almost immediately in therapy, his behaviors, like he's making these kind of demanding, almost childlike requests for attention, start showing up with his therapist. So instead of just pointing out these patterns from a distance, Yalom worked with Ron in the moment, addressing his underlying fears of abandonment, his dependency, all as they played out during their sessions.
It's basically holding up a mirror, yeah? But not in a, hey, look, this is what you're doing wrong kind of way. It's more like, this is happening right now. What do you notice? How does it feel? That immediacy is what gives it the power. But, okay, here's where I get stuck. What happens if the therapist totally misreads the situation? How do you recover when you're working in the here and now and you just get it wrong?
Well, the beauty of this approach is that it thrives on transparency. The therapist isn't pretending to have all the answers. They're using their own emotions and reactions as clues. So, like, Yalom suggests that if you feel irritation or detachment during a session, that might signal something deeper about the patient's relationship patterns. And admitting those feelings, tactfully, of course, that can open the door to some profound insight. Like if you say, I'm sensing some distance between us right now. Do you feel it too?
Wow, that's bold. I mean, naming the emotional elephants in the room, that really takes guts. Especially when, let's face it, we therapists aren't exactly immune to bringing our own emotional baggage into the room, right? There's got to be a really fine line there, though, between therapeutic honesty and just oversharing, right?
Absolutely, and Yalom emphasizes that too. Sharing what you notice should always be constructive. It's about creating a safe place for the patient to explore, not shifting the focus to the therapist's experience. But think about the breakthroughs that can come from this. When a patient realizes, oh, this thing I'm doing with you, I actually do it with everyone. It's like they're untangling this huge knot of their relational struggles.
Kind of like real-time diagnostics. Now, speaking of untangling, what really stood out to me in this section was his guidance on dream exploration. I mean, there's a whole symbolic rabbit hole to go down when it comes to dreams, right? Jung, Freud. But what makes Yalom's approach so digestible is how grounded it is. It's not about overanalyzing every single detail or dredging up some Freudian absurdity. It's about pulling out what resonates for the patient.
Exactly. Dreams in Yalom's framework are like coded messages from the subconscious. They don't dictate the therapy, but they are incredible conversation starters. Take that courtroom dream, right? From the text. This patient is unconsciously prosecuting their father for emotional neglect. And the dream seems dramatic at first, but unpacking it revealed these profound truths about the patient's unresolved feelings. This deep anger mixed with guilt for even holding that anger in the first place.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting how dreams like that cut through all the rational defenses people build up, right? You can sit across from someone who insists they're totally fine with their dad, even after decades of unspoken resentment. And then they have a dream where they're shouting at him in front of a jury. And suddenly, You've got this emotional lighthouse in a storm of denial.
Beautifully put. They bypass the conscious filters we use to avoid uncomfortable truths. So, for therapists, they provide this imagery, these metaphors, that help patients make connections that they might not even realize that they're ready for. Of course, it's key not to treat dreams as puzzles that need those definite solutions. Yalom specifically talks about pillaging and looting the dream. So taking only what feels meaningful for the patient's current struggles.
That makes sense. So the patient, they're dreaming about falling into a dark basement. That's not necessarily a harrowing sign of repressed trauma. It might simply point to their fear of vulnerability in the room, or maybe a broader fear of the unknown. But what I appreciate again is how this method respects the patient's autonomy. It's not about putting the therapist's spin on the dream. It's about letting the patient decide what resonates.
Exactly. And that respect extends even into how we handle those more emotionally loaded moments in therapy, like transference. When a patient brings emotions they feel towards someone else into their relationship with their therapist, it can be challenging, but it can also be wildly transformative.
Oh yes, the emotional landmine of transference. Whether it's anger, dependency, attraction, there's absolutely no way to avoid it. So Yalom's advice is to lean into those moments with an almost surgical precision. Like, there's that patient who kept apologizing, right? Apologizing in the sessions because they valued the relationship so much. That wasn't just politeness. It was a gateway to unpacking a history of being dismissed, being invalidated.
Spot on. When Yalom is identifying those moments, he's showing how a therapist can create this safe space for reflection. By naming the pattern, I notice you apologize a lot when you think you've disappointed me. He empowers the patient to see these behaviors, as adaptations that they developed for survival.
Which, honestly, is probably one of the hardest things for a patient to admit, isn't it? That the strategy that helped you survive your childhood is now sabotaging your adult life. Therapy asks you to confront, to slowly unlearn habits your brain thought were protecting you. It's like emotional reverse engineering.
Ooh, that's a really great way of putting it. And the therapist's job in those moments is to guide the patient gently. What makes Yalom's take on transference really stand out is his insistence on transparency. So, for example, if a patient seems withdrawn, detached, the therapist might say, "You seem distant today. Can we talk about what you're feeling right now?" This opens a door to a conversation about the dynamics of the relationship, and even how those dynamics might echo in their life outside the room.
All right, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. That level of transparency could feel intimidating, right? And not just for the patient. I mean, even as therapists, isn't there a little part of us that worries, oh God, did I just derail the whole session by calling this out?
It's natural to have that thought, but Yalom is encouraging therapists to trust the process. Naming those dynamics in real time, it doesn't derail the work. It deepens it. It models healthy communication. It shows that relationships can survive confrontation. And crucially, it helps patients develop more authentic connections. These sensitive moments, however delicate, they're often where the most meaningful breakthroughs lie, really. So, with these techniques in place, the conversation kind of naturally shifts to the existential themes that are often at the root of human distress. Yalom really brings his philosophical side into play when he's addressing these existential concerns, like mortality, freedom, responsibility, and that search for meaning. He sees these as universal struggles that his patients are facing in therapy. These aren't just abstract ideas, They're really embedded in how people experience anxiety, how they navigate relationships, and how they make decisions.
Okay, so the roadmap we're following looks like this. First, we talked about the therapist-patient relationship, and we established that connection as being central to the whole process. Then, we moved on to the tools and how therapy becomes personalized to each patient's unique needs. And now, we're diving into the big existential stuff. And let me guess, Autumn, death is right at the top of that list, isn't it?
Exactly. Mortality. Yalom considers it to be one of the core existential concerns because it's this kind of looming reality that underlies so much of human fear and suffering. People might come into therapy saying that they're anxious about turning 40 or they're upset over a breakup. But often there's this undercurrent of fearing the fact that life is finite. When you really confront mortality, you're forced to ask yourself, what am I doing with my time? What actually matters to me? And that, is both terrifying and transformative.
Terrifying for sure. And also, might I add, a little awkward to talk about under fluorescent lighting with a box of tissues nearby. But this is really where Yalom shines, right? He doesn't shy away from those fears. He reframes them. Like when he works with patients who are grieving the loss of a loved one, he helps them explore not just the grief itself, but also what that loss is teaching them about their own lives.
Precisely. There's that case we both love, where the patient was just consumed by guilt after losing a family member. They felt paralyzed by regret over not being emotionally present in that person's final years. Yalom didn't dismiss their guilt. Instead, he helped them see what it revealed, this desire to live more fully with the people who were still alive. That guilt was actually trying to show them something, and by eventually embracing it, they found a completely new way to engage with their relationships.
So it's like he flipped guilt on its head. It's no longer this weight that's dragging the patient down, but instead, it becomes a compass that's pointing toward what they care about the most. But here's the million-dollar question. How do you keep someone from getting stuck in that guilt cycle? From just constantly ruminating and never actually moving forward?
Well, that's where Yalom's skill as a guide really comes in. He helps patients redirect their focus. The past can't be changed, we know that, but the emotional lessons that it offers can actually shape the future. So, in this case, Yalom encouraged the patient to shift from an obsession with, what could I have done differently, to instead asking, how do I want to show up now with the people that I still have? So, it's not about ignoring the actual pain. It's about transforming that pain into something meaningful.
Right, so instead of spiraling, the patient channels that energy into action. That's existential transformation right there. Taking the fear, taking the regret, and then turning it into growth. And it's not just about grief, right? Mortality pops up in the sneakiest of ways. Even like everyday anxieties about aging or losing relevance can all be traced back to the core fact that life is finite.
Absolutely. On the surface, someone might fixate on their physical appearance or career failures, but those are often just masks for deeper anxieties about impermanence. By confronting this idea of mortality head-on, therapy helps people let go of those distractions and really focus on what truly fulfills them. It's about living intentionally in the time that they have.
Okay, let's take this one step further. If mortality is one thread, then responsibility is another. And responsibility, man, that's a tough one for patients to wrestle with. I mean, nobody likes to hear that they might be even partly responsible for their own unhappiness. But that's at the core of Yalom's existential approach, right? It's helping patients own their choices without, completely drowning in self-blame.
Responsibility can feel really daunting because it really shifts the burden of change onto the individual. But Yalom reframes it as personal empowerment. So, take the example of that patient who struggled with a pattern of failed relationships. At first, they blamed their partners entirely, saying that they just had terrible luck. Yalom gently helped them to look inward, asking questions like, "What role do you think you played in these dynamics?" Now, that's an uncomfortable question to ask, but it also cracked open a much deeper exploration.
Right, and as much as "let's explore that" is a therapist's favorite move, this is where Yalom really makes it stick. That patient started recognizing how they avoided conflict, how they invalidated their own needs, and then ended up with partners that mirrored that neglect. And it wasn't about blaming themselves. It was about understanding how their behaviors contributed to the outcomes that they were stuck in.
And that shift, from victimization to agency, is so incredibly powerful. Once the patient owned their part of that pattern, they weren't at the mercy of terrible luck anymore, right? They could actively choose to do things differently in their future relationships, which is very liberating. Responsibility isn't a burden. It's freedom disguised as accountability.
And speaking of accountability, let's not forget about decision-making. That's another existential doorway that Yalom likes to use. Every single choice that a patient makes is an act of freedom, but it also comes with consequences. And those consequences, those are really scary. See, people just freeze up in therapy, not because they don't know what they want, but because every choice comes with a loss of all the options that they didn't choose.
Exactly. Decisions are these really profound existential moments because they highlight freedom and all of its anxieties. Yalom uses that example of Mike, the patient who was torn between two romantic relationships. He wasn't just choosing between two people. He was wrestling with his own dread of disappointing his family, who had always shaped his choices. Therapy helped him look past those external expectations and turn toward his own authentic desires.
And once the focus shifted to that internal conflict, Mike could then start untangling it. It wasn't about relationship A versus relationship B anymore. It became about autonomy versus validation, what he wanted versus what he thought he owed to others. But here's my question. How do you keep patients from getting trapped in analysis paralysis? Decisions seem so ripe for overthinking.
Definitely. And that's where Yalom leans on techniques like role-playing or even guided visualization. For someone like Mike, the therapist might say, "Let's imagine your life a year from now with choice A. How does that feel? Now let's picture choice B." By helping them envision the real-world consequences of their decisions, these exercises bring clarity to their emotions. Patients often discover that they already know what they want. They've just been avoiding ever admitting it because of fear.
Fear, right? That's the real villain here, isn't it? Fear of regret, fear of failure, fear of disappointing the people around you. Decisions in therapy become these turning points where you either give in to that fear or you step into your own agency. And when Yalom talks about subtle tools, like exaggerating unhelpful patterns, that can break the loop, right?
Absolutely. Because by gently highlighting the futility of external blame or avoidance, the therapist helps patients see the absurdity of their resistance. Take the patient waiting for their absent parent to return and fix things. Yalom magnifies that narrative to show just how much power they're giving away. And once they really see that, they can reclaim responsibility and then actually make choices that align with their actual goals.
So, mortality, responsibility, decisions, these are like therapy's existential toolkit. What I really appreciate about Yalom is how he doesn't frame these concerns as problems to solve, but more as tensions to navigate. It's not about erasing fear or uncertainty. It's about learning to live with them and still moving forward.
Exactly. Yalom's work reminds us that these existential struggles aren't what make life completely unbearable. They're what make it meaningful. Grappling with our own mortality forces us to really treasure the time that we have. Taking responsibility gives us freedom. And making decisions helps us define who we are. When patients embrace these truths, therapy transcends symptom management. It becomes a real path toward authenticity and purpose. So, to wrap things up, Yalom's approach to therapy is really based on this idea that true healing starts with connection, therapist and patient, as equals, fellow humans on a journey together. It's about being open and vulnerable with each other, showing real empathy, and finding that sweet spot between guiding someone and just being human with them.
Right. And if Yalom taught us anything, it's that therapy isn't this neat clinical thing. It's messy, imperfect, and can be pretty uncomfortable. But by making it personal, tackling those patterns as they happen, and facing some of life's big questions, it becomes something really powerful and human.
Exactly. From diving into what's happening right now in the room to using dreams and transference to gain insights, Yalom shows us that therapy isn't about fixing someone. It's about truly understanding them. And by digging into those big existential questions like mortality and responsibility, he pushes us to live our lives with courage, on purpose, being our real selves.
So the big takeaway here, growth, or whatever you want to call it, isn't about running away from pain. It's about using it, understanding it, to live a fuller life. Therapy isn't about solving life's problems. It's about learning to be okay with them.
Beautifully put, Rachel. Whether you're a therapist, a patient, or just someone trying to make sense of this whole being human thing, Yalom's philosophy reminds us that we don't need all the answers. It's about the transformative power that comes from exploring it all together.